I find myself scrolling on Instagram Reels far more than I wish to admit. In my defense, it's the only scrolling-based social media I ever use. I deleted TikTok a while ago, and scrolling through my shorts feed makes me feel like a lobotomized version of the fat dudes from WALL-E. Instagram Reels though is that cream of the crop slop. It's some gourmet slop, I dare say. Occasionally in between car crashes and Chinese fishing boat cat videos, I get these reels that only have a few likes and barely any views. I really enjoy getting these. Usually nothing interesting is going on, but occasionally you'll stumble upon a real gem.
What's Yoshi's go-to pickup line? Are you a fruit? Because I'd love to tongue you up.
And there's just something about finding an unhinged video that almost no one else has laid their eyes on, which sparks my curiosity. For a while, I inadvertently molded my algorithm to feed me this type of content, and I amassed quite the collection of bizarre stuff. Me and my buddy would go back and forth, sending the obscure reels we found to one another. What does any of this have to do with anime though? The interest in obscure content extends outside the realm of Instagram Reels. When it comes to obscure anime though, I haven't delved very deep into stuff I'd consider actually obscure. I just have so many more well-known series on the back burner that I can't justify watching some forgotten OVA from the 80s. Over a year ago now, I made a video about Mononoke, a pretty interesting anime that some of you might be familiar with. While looking at the origins of this series, I was led to something called Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales. It was an anthology series released in 2006 featuring 3 different stories that were each handled by different writers as well as directors. This is where Mononoke originated from, going by the name Bakeneko. And while that one-off story eventually became a very successful property through its sequel series, the other stories were not as fortunate though, especially with the subject of today's video, Goddess of the Dark Tower. There is practically no discussion of this online. The already sparse reviews of Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales don't focus on this section. Most of the discussion is understandably about the Bakeneko story, leaving the Dark Tower practically non-existent online. I couldn't even find any information about its director or writer. It doesn't help that this collection isn't available on any streaming service. Not Crunchyroll, not Hulu, not even Tubi. Besides purchasing a DVD copy, the only way to watch this is through piracy sites or uploads onto YouTube. I think this is part of the reason I feel compelled to talk about this anime. Since it's largely been forgotten, this would give it a chance to be remembered by some. But that alone wouldn't be enough reason for me to make an entire video about it. If the contents weren't interesting, then who cares that nobody remembers it? This one's a weird case for me because I found it quite entertaining, but probably not for the intended reasons. I watched the English dub since it was the version someone uploaded onto YouTube. It's about as janky as you'd imagine a dub from the time period would be. Honestly, I wouldn't watch it any other way though. The awkward line deliveries add a strange charm to the experience that weirdly fits the vibe this has going for it. This is a bizarre feeling story, like it doesn't know what the tone is supposed to be. You'll have a horrific moment where a lady sucks a dude dry in the most literal sense, and then later they're doing goofy slapstick stuff, sound effects and all. In most stories, this would have robbed me of any investment I had, but the tonal whiplash you get here alongside the bad dub made me weirdly captivated. I think this is part of the reason I've struggled to make a video about this show, because by most metrics it's not a very good anime. I enjoyed watching for a bunch of specific aspects that most people understandably would not care for, but I think there is some value in that though. It was made during the early years of digital anime, and there is a particular feel that shows made during this time had, which is mostly faded as the digital process developed and improved. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or is this a style that nobody really cares for anymore? In particular, it reminds me of early Naruto episodes. The show kind of has the vibe of a Naruto filler story, something many of you are probably fortunate enough to have never seen. But if you're like me and unknowingly watched them not knowing what filler was, you probably know the feeling I'm talking about. Though to the anime's credit, it's written much better than most of the filler episodes. A large part of this is owed to the soundtrack created by Takanashi Yasuharu, who is known for his work on shows like Naruto. Would you look at that? The anime follows Tsuchinosuke, a falconer in medieval Japan who falls in love with a forgotten god named Tomihime. Its story was based on a Japanese play from the 1950s called Tenshu Monogatari, written by a man named Kyoka Izumi. Izumi is a pretty notable author in Japanese history who I'd never heard of before working on this video. Among his many works, he had written dozens of plays that are still being performed to this day. Izumi, however, never saw much of their success since they only became popular during the 1950s, over a decade after his passing. He seems to have become a pretty beloved figure in Japan, enough for his likeness to be used in several different high-profile anime like the Rohan JoJo spin-off series, Bungo Stray Dogs, and some other works. A pretty impressive legacy for a man who's mostly unknown outside of Japan. While I'm not very familiar with his writings, the concepts taken from them here are actually pretty interesting. I don't know how faithful of an adaptation this was, but it's nice to know that one of his stories can exist in a format more readily available than the occasional theater performance. The handling of the main character was odd to me. At the start, he is framed as this moral man who's in direct contrast to the many despicable individuals in the story. But when you actually look at his actions, you realize he's kind of a sleazy guy. He abandons his fiancée who seems to truly love and care for him, even risking her own life at times, just so that he can get with some immortal demon lady he's only known for a brief period of time. But hey, I've never been around an immortal demon lady, so who knows how I'd react in his situation. I think this reflects one of the story's stronger aspects. It doesn't really bother making any of the characters moral individuals. The actions of people even outside those who are clearly meant to be evil don't fall in line with what we'd expect from the quote-unquote good guys of the story. The princess of the Forgotten Gods, while a sympathetic character, has killed thousands of humans, some of whom were good individuals, and she even kills one of her own sisters to protect the main character. Everyone here does morally ambiguous things, well, except for these two, who are by far the best characters in the story. Kids these days are looking up to Andrew Tate, Sneeko, or whatever retarded influencer it is nowadays. But in reality, they should be idolizing these guys. I'm not even being that hyperbolic with those statements. Like, look at this scene. The main guy rudely declines their offer of friendship because he's a beta cheating loser, but they are unbothered by this slight and merely laugh it off because
the lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep.
And later, when the main guy and them were cornered and facing certain death, they, without any hesitation, sacrificed themselves to allow him a chance of escape, despite only just meeting the guy. Just listen to what they say when fighting a battle they know they can't win. Luckily, they did end up surviving that encounter. I wholeheartedly mean it when I say I love these guys. It's a tragedy that they have never once been mentioned online. Probably doesn't help that they don't have names. Okay, so like it turns out they do have names. I don't think they ever said it in the show, so that's why I didn't know it, but they do have names. Mark that down, guys. But who cares? The main guy has a name, but I don't care about him enough to remember it. In my eyes, these dudes are the true main characters here, with or without names. They were ultimately the only ones who left the story unscathed. It ends in a pure bloodbath. Everyone on both sides is just slaughtering one another. No one is spared from it. I think it's a pretty well done ending, all things considered. A happy conclusion would just feel unfitting for these characters. The bittersweet fate of the protagonist felt like a proper way to wrap things up. I've probably made it sound like this is a bad anime. Comparing anything to Naruto filler episodes is never a good look. While there are definitely a lot of elements that are just poorly executed, on the other hand, there were plenty of interesting ideas and moments that I think gives this anime some value. It being based on a story written nearly 100 years ago contributes to this having a distinctly different mood than most other anime. It feels like a show that would play on Adult Swim late into the night, something you'd have on in the background, half asleep, not really paying much attention to. Your only memory of it being these hazy bits and pieces, something you could never find again after that night, unsure if it actually existed or was something your mind just made up. It's an oddly specific feeling that it invoked, but I'm sure a lot of you have had something similar to this happen. So why am I talking about some random anime from the early 2000s? In an age where the majority of content we consume is fed to us through algorithms, I feel like I've been conditioned to only watch the stuff I'm served, which isn't all inherently bad. There is a lot of content I love which I would have never found if an algorithm hadn't recommended it to me. But the side effect of that is this loss of discovery. I no longer seek out a significant amount of what I watch. But with this, it was never recommended to me by an algorithm or some reviewer. In search of a visually unique anime, I happened upon Mononoke. I then went on on to research its origins, ultimately leading me to find the Dark Castle short. It felt nice to organically discover an anime that had long been forgotten by most people, and it was ultimately forgotten for a reason. The production value is clunky, the dialogue is awkward, and the story isn't gonna blow anyone's mind. In spite of that, it's an oddly captivating work. The flaws can be charming, and there are glimpses of something interesting going on here. I wouldn't ever recommend this to someone I know, but I'm sure some of you watching understand where I'm coming from when I say this is compelling for reasons I doubt were intentional. It's likely this story will never have a resurgence in popularity. It was the most forgettable piece of a collection that is only ever remembered because one of the parts went on to become a successful property. Nobody even wants to have it on their streaming platform, not even Tubi. The only reason I ever ended up watching it was because some dude decided to upload it onto his YouTube channel. There's something odd about looking at these uploads, knowing it's one of the few places this anime still exists on. Ayakashi Samurai Horror Tales, Goddess of the Dark Tower, was never gonna be some breakout hit. Even in 2006, there were plenty of other incredible anime released at the time for this to stand out in comparison. And that's fine. Not every anime has to be some massive success. I'm glad that there are these weird, forgotten shows that we can stumble upon and just appreciate them for what they were. My name has been Goob. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.